Hi, everyone. My name is Annie Johnson, and I'm the Associate University Librarian for Publishing, Preservation, Research, and Digital Access at the University of Delaware Library, Museums, and Press. I'm going to be talking to you all today about how managers like yourself can better promote staff work and expertise to your college and university community. But first, let me give some background. My interest in this topic really comes from my experience overseeing the institutional repository at Temple University, my former employer. I noticed that many faculty, and even some staff, assumed the repository was essentially automatic. They had no idea how much effort went on behind the scenes. So I sent out a tweet asking for ideas about how to make this labor more visible. Many people responded, and in fact, I'm going to mention some of the examples shared with me in this presentation. Although I have to say it's worth reading the original thread because there were a lot of good ideas and comments. I've come to realize that this is an issue that we don't talk nearly enough about in libraries. And I just want to give a quick shout out to my excellent colleagues, Sarah Wilson and Nancy Turner, who really helped me think through this issue and supported me in trying to operationalize this work at Temple. So thank you, Sarah and Nancy. Okay, so today I'm going to share 5 ideas with you for how you and your library might better promote staff work. Some of these ideas, or maybe all of them, will certainly be familiar to you, but I hope there will also be some aspects to these ideas that you haven't thought about before. The first idea is to utilize social media. Many libraries use blog posts, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook to share information about their staff and the work they do. The great thing about social media is that it's so low stakes. It's easy for a manager to create the content and then hand it off to their communications team to post. And I just want to give a few examples. Here's one from James Madison University Libraries. They use their blog to interview staff members as part of their Feature Friday series. What I like about this post in particular is that it not only helps people get to know the staff member, but it also helps demystify a really important service in the library, interlibrary loan. Harvard Library does something similar every Sunday on their Instagram page, which they call Staff Sunday, which is also worth checking out. Instead of focusing on specific individuals, Winthrop University Library uses data to showcase library work. In this case, they created an infographic they posted on Twitter that lists the number of archive questions answered, among other stats. And I believe they do this every month. As I mentioned, social media is an easy way to promote staff work, but there are also some downsides to focusing on social media. First, not all staff want their pictures or information online. You might even have trouble finding staff that are willing to be profiled. Second, depending on how active your library is on social media, what your follower count is, how many people engage with your posts, you may or may not reach that many people. The second idea for making staff labor more visible is to hold workshops that discuss behind-the-scenes work. Vanderbilt University Libraries, for example, held a series of workshops for faculty about collection development. The goal was to teach faculty about collections budgets and how the library makes decisions about acquisitions and subscriptions. While Vanderbilt focused on collections, I think you could do workshops about many different aspects of library work. Of course, as I'm sure many of you have experienced, workshops are not always the best way to communicate. If you have a strong track record of getting faculty to attend your workshops, this approach is definitely worth trying. But if you don't, you might want to consider another method of highlighting staff work. A third way to make staff work more visible is to enhance staff profiles on your library website. You can allow staff to add brief About Me sections, degrees, ORCID IDs, committee affiliations, and more. If your library is hesitant to make these types of changes, see if there are other ways you can give staff public credit for projects and initiatives they worked on or currently work on. Here's one example of a staff profile at the University of Pennsylvania Libraries. And you can see it includes a nice About Me section. The University of Michigan Libraries also has really robust staff profiles. That's another one to check out. At Temple, one thing we did was to create a people page to our institutional repository, which lists all of the individuals across the library who contribute to the repository in some form or another. The goal of this was really twofold. First, we wanted to recognize people's contributions. And second, as I mentioned before, we really wanted people who use the repository to understand that it takes a lot of work to keep it running smoothly. Again, some important things to think about before using the library website as a way to promote staff work and expertise. First, not everyone is going to want a lot of information about themselves made public. And second, it might be difficult to get people to add information and to keep that information up to date. A fourth idea for promoting staff work is to take advantage of your institutional repository. Yes, you should encourage staff to add any publications and presentations to the repository, but you should also encourage staff to add other types of materials as well. So maybe that's the handout they prepared for a class they're teaching, or maybe it's a library-wide research report that you think deserves a wider audience. At Temple, for example, librarians interviewed faculty about their needs around big data, and we added the team's report about those interviews to the repository. Of course, the downside of VIR is that, again, only a limited number of staff are going to want to contribute or feel that they have something to contribute. In addition, this is something you'll have to continually ask staff to do, or they will probably forget. A final way to showcase staff expertise and work is through your library's annual report. Now, most libraries have annual reports, but it's worth taking a look at yours to see what it does and does not include. Does it include stories about individual staff members? Is there a staff accomplishments section? Do articles talk vaguely about a new library initiative, or do they use people-centered language and name the actual staff involved? As most annual reports are aimed at donors, they may not be the most effective tool for reaching faculty and staff across your institution. In addition, annual reports tend to focus on what's new, so often operational work is not highlighted. Okay, so I've given you 5 ideas for how you as a manager might better promote the work of your staff. But I want to stress that you should not simply take these ideas to your communication team within your library and ask them to do it for you. It's really up to you as the manager to figure out how to do the heavy lifting here. Thank you so much, and I'd love to hear any ideas for how you're tackling this issue at your library. Thanks.